So here it is, Labor Day weekend, and as we've already established, the grilling of meat is an important thing, and possibly the grilling of veggie burgers if you're so inclined. This is the UCC, it's okay. But we have so many things that we do that are part of our tradition for Labor Day. We celebrate the end of summer, we go and we buy a new washing machine because they're on sale, and we forget what Labor Day is all about. Don't we? I mean, how many people stop and really reflect on Labor Day? No, it doesn't happen. The closest you get is you get a day off so you don't have to labor, except for all the people who are working at the stores that are selling the appliances that are on sale. But today we actually have a scripture passage that connects us with the secular holiday of Labor Day. It's one of those things that every once in a while things will match up. And we have the story of the letter to Philemon, where Paul writes this letter to his friend and talks about the slave Onesimus. And it's the only time in the entire 3-year lectionary cycle that we read an entire book of the Bible. That was the whole thing that Steve read. It's one letter. And in that letter, Paul asks Philemon to let his slave, Onesimus, go free. Now, so often when people preach this text over the years, it's been preached about race. But that really ignores the fact that in the ancient world, slavery wasn't a race-based system. It was a question of warfare and capturing people, or of economics, when people might be sold into slavery. And so we have this back and forth discussion. We only get half of it, but we have Paul trying to wheedle and to cajole Philemon into freeing Onesimus. Now, Paul does it in a couple ways. He starts off by talking about how wonderful Philemon is and how important it is to think of Philemon and all of the close relationship they have and all of the saints who are there in Philemon's community. He's really buttering them up. And finally he gets to the ask and he says, and so I would like you to send me Onesimus. This guy who was worthless to you beforehand but has become so valuable to me. And then Paul leans on the guilt. When he starts saying, you know, I will repay you. Not to mention all that you owe me, but I will repay you whatever this slave is worth to you. But again, remember that you owe me your very self. It's one of these moments of guilt-inducing persuasion where Paul finally gets to the end with a blessing. Because Paul is so sure that Philemon, having received this brief letter, is going to do exactly what he wants. And so we read it today, and we read it as a text of economic justice about how one person should not own another. Now, Paul didn't actually make the big argument that slavery was wrong. You know, he was a couple thousand years too early for that one. But he certainly argued that no Christian should own another, that it didn't make any sense for one person to hold another in economic bondage. And so as we read it here on Labor Day weekend, it kind of connects a little bit. Labor Day started back in 1882 in New York and a handful of other places where workers gathered to celebrate their solidarity with one another. It didn't become a federal holiday until 1894, when finally the labor movement was moving fast enough that it was politically a poor choice not to mark it and recognize it. And so we look at the benefits of labor, the benefits of organized labor specifically. silly little things like a 40-hour work week or an 8-hour work day. Things like overtime pay and the end of child labor. Paid vacation, safety standards, sick leave, lunch breaks, workers' compensation, employer-provided health insurance, and a host of other things are all things that we take for granted because of the labor movement. Those early people in the labor movement stood up against powerful owners. And of course, there are more than enough stories of miners striking and being shot down by National Guard troops brought in to break the strike. We see that standing up against the powerful, working for justice and economic stability, doesn't always receive accolades, but sometimes resistance. Back in 1954, when unions in America were at their peak, about 35% of workers were unionized. And as of last year, it was down to 11.5%. Things have been changing. Partially due to a shift in economics, but also due to a shift in politics. There have been plenty out there working to reduce the strength of labor. You know, back in 1968, the middle 60% of households earned 53.2% of the national income. By 2013, that number had fallen to just 45%. And during that same period, union membership had fallen from 28% to 11%. They tell us in statistics classes that correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it does make you scratch your head and wonder if perhaps the shift from union jobs to non-union has been a change that has not been so good for our country. I remember when my son was born and my wife was working at Yale and her union was out on strike. And Pete Seeger actually came and did a concert in New Haven as a benefit for the union. That was, in fact, Ian's very, very first concert that he ever attended. I don't think he remembers it. This week, we have said goodbye to Fred Hellerman, Pete Seeger's longtime partner in musical crime as part of the Weavers, who just passed away the other day. Now, the Weavers, folk musicians, people that I can relate to fairly well, sang a lot of songs that encouraged justice among people, and for that they ended up blacklisted by Senator McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee. We, of course, have watched as they were more than exonerated, but came through as heroes. We don't have unions in the church, but at the hospital where I work, the nurses and most of the other folks are involved in group representation with Union 1199 of the Service Employees International Union and the New York State Nurses Association, standing up and giving the individual workers a voice. Now, you may be asking, what does this have to do with me? I mean, certainly some of us may be involved with organized labor, others probably not, and many of you maybe have reached the point where you're just drawing a pension, which maybe you have because it's one of the deals that organized labor earned for you. But as we move forward as a people, we're always called to be on the lookout for one another, to look out for those who are held down economically, and to work for justice. Just as Paul was a voice for Onesimus, asking Philemon to set him free, to treat him as a brother and not as property. And we all are called to do that. It may be through organized labor, but it may just be by looking out for one another, for making sure that people are treated fairly, and maybe for those of us who are in management, making sure that we treat our workers fairly. It's a difficult conversation these days. It's a politically charged one, as we see politicians, some of whom have built their entire career off of trying to do away with fair working standards. But we're called to keep our eyes open, to speak a word for justice, to let Labor Day be not just a day of barbecues, so make sure you fire up the grill, because that's important, but to be a day of paying attention, to be a day of committing to action, to working for justice, to taking the gospel and giving it legs, as we make sure that no one is oppressed, that all have a fair and living wage. As Christians, that's really our call. We may have different ways of going about it, you and I, the person in the pew next to you. But that call to action is there for all of us. May we then celebrate this day. May we celebrate the gifts of those who have gone before us, working for justice and equality for workers. And may we too celebrate the value of honest work and honest pay. Amen.